You may be seated.
I struggled with each and every step. My feet felt like lead. The incline before me seemed much steeper than it really was. I leaned forward to keep my balance. My breathing was labored and my heartbeat was racing. I was bordering on panic. There was a burning in my forehead that would not go away. I squinted into the sun. I wondered if I could make it. My bones were aching and my joints cried out with every step. Somehow I had to overcome this overwhelming desire to give up and lift my dragging feet to take one more step. I didn't want to go forward. I wanted to quit. In fact, I wanted to die. But I had to keep moving. I had to make it. After all, I was their pastor and they couldn't start church without me. Hello, my name is Mark. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I have struggled with depression. Hi. You know, the holidays are a time when many people struggle with feelings of depression. And I had recently shared my story at the Hope House and other places, and someone thought it would be a good idea to talk to you about my story this morning. So I want to share it with you. I don't know exactly when I first heard the term depression. I can't remember a time, though, when I didn't struggle with my moods and my emotions. As a child, this meant going to school every day with a knot in my stomach. Man, I used to see that school bus coming and I could just feel the tension, and I felt like I just wanted to run back home. I tried that once, but Mom sent me right back out to this bus stop. It's one thing when that happens in first grade. It's another thing when it happens in 11th grade. I don't know what all that was. My mom just thought I was moody, but I think some of it was kind of a social anxiety problem that I had. It's not like I had a terribly unhappy childhood or anything. My parents stayed together throughout my upbringing, never divorced. There was nothing like abuse or violence in our household. Though with 3 boys and a little sister who came late to the party, it was a chaotic place. We played hard and we were loud and we laughed a lot. Sometimes people got hurt. In fact, I've joked that the ER staff at our local hospital knew all of us Copley boys by our first name. But there were 2 negative things in my household growing up that probably contributed to the person that I would become. One was this overwhelming sense that somehow we weren't as good as other people. Our town was segregated into neighborhoods, and you knew what class you belonged to by where you lived. And my mom, often verbally, would show her resentment to the fact that we didn't live in one of the better neighborhoods. Now, it's strange how kids pick up on those kind of ideas. But what we sort of got from that was a self-perception that somehow we were poor. And it really wasn't true. I look back upon my childhood, we had everything we needed and were blessed with much more than we needed. And yet our perception in our mind was that somehow we were poor, that we weren't as good as other families, and this led to a kind of a very low self-esteem. The other negative thing that happened in our household is that we were brutal to one another with our language. We used insults, and we regularly called each other ugly or stupid or fat, insulted one another on a regular basis. Now, we weren't allowed to use profanity, but that didn't matter. We came up with other words and terms that were just as damaging as their saltier originals, and we used them regularly. We would do it in the name of humor. Oh, we're just joking, and we would laugh. But you know that saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me? That is a lie. The truth is, sticks and stones will leave you with the bruises that will go away in a few days. But words that are said to us, especially in our young years, really do leave a mark that can go on throughout our lives. Not only with siblings, my brothers, but also with my parents at times would use this kind of verbal shame and things to discipline us, and it left a hurt and a mark in our lives. I was raised in the Bible Belt of southwestern Virginia, where believing in God would seem like something everybody did. My family, my parents were nominal Christians, and we attended church on and off throughout my childhood. After a rebellious spell in my teenage years, I surrendered my life to Christ at age 17 through the witness of a girlfriend who prayed for me and invited me to her youth group at a local Nazarene church. That girlfriend would later become my sweet wife, Candy, who you all know. And in October, we celebrated our 30th anniversary together. We have one daughter, Bethany, who's here with us this morning. She is 25, and she just got married last summer, and her husband Ian is with us. And our little family has been filled with love and blessings. And when I say that, I think, well, with all those blessings in my life, how could a person like me possibly be depressed? Well, that's kind of the problem, right? And one of the problems with our hurts and our habits and our hang-ups is that they don't make sense. We can think of good reasons why we shouldn't feel the way we feel. We can think of good reasons why that thing that happened so long ago still shouldn't have an effect on us today, but it still does. When I was younger, I would occasionally confess my struggles to others, and some would pray for me. Others offered spiritual advice or books that I should read. But by the time I began pastoring my first church in Virginia, I had stopped talking about it. I just decided it was something I should keep secret. I had agreed to become the pastor of the very church where I had been baptized as a teenager. I was just turning 30 that year, and there were many pressures on me as a young pastor. Some of them I handled real well, some of them I didn't handle so well. But I had lots of pressure that I put on myself about people's acceptance and concerns about my success. And these would torment me late into the night as I would often struggle with my emotions. Now, it didn't happen overnight, but the church there began to grow and the pressures mounted. And also because I made changes in the church's programs that didn't make everybody happy. You know how that works. The pressure sometimes of having conflict in the church was tough, and I didn't handle that all so well. I managed to hide what I dealt with as far as depression from most of the people in the church. I would have whole days that I would lose sometimes. What I would do on those days is I would literally hide in the parsonage or in the church office. I would pull the shades, I would not answer the phone, and pray that nobody really needed me. The isolation only made my depression worse. And then I had this terrible fear that if anybody really knew how I struggled, that I would lose my ministry or worse. Here's how this works. The enemy would use my depression in this way. As pastors, we receive a lot of love. I mean, a lot of people love us. The church does a wonderful job loving their pastors. Isn't that great? And but it didn't matter how many people loved me. The enemy would still say to me, if they knew, they really knew you, they wouldn't love you. And they wouldn't let you be their pastor. When it came to to the success of the church, no matter how the church was doing, no matter how blessed we were as a church and good things were happening, it wouldn't matter because the enemy would say, Yes, but if they only knew who you really were, all of that would go away. That's how the enemy uses our weaknesses and our secrets against us. So I couldn't dare talk to anyone about what was going on in my life in those depressive times. The enemy really had me bound up in fear. I felt like I was just hanging on to a life that was more and more slipping away from my control. And I couldn't talk to anybody about it. These fears would manifest themselves in terrible insecurity, terrible self-image, and even though others might have reasons to envy me and our church's blessings, I would feel like it was all at risk all the time. My lowest point came in 1999. At a time of our greatest success at our church, we had begun a new service in that church that aimed at reaching unchurched people, and it was enormously successful. In fact, in just a couple of months, the size of the church doubled, attendance doubled, and we baptized 25 people that year. Now, did this help me with my depression? No. If anything, it made the pressure greater. More people, more problems, right? I'd always told myself, though, that if only the church would grow and succeed, then I would be happy. And now I found out it wasn't true. But there was more that happened that year. In the fall, a young man, 19 years old, was killed in a car accident on his way to church that morning. I dearly loved him and his family, and this shocking loss was devastating to them and to our church. And then only a few weeks later, another young lady who was only 40 years old was killed in a similar manner in another car accident that took her life violently. Her mother attended our church, and I worked with her family as well. Now, it's amazing how God helps pastors to have the strength to help other people in their time of need. Because that happened in the fall. Both of those families lost their loved ones in the fall. And I ministered to them throughout the holidays, their first holidays without their loved one. I counseled them. I wept with them. Our church gathered around and loved them and helped them. And we were getting through this all together. And then January came. In January, what happened was, I know part of it had to be a sense that I personally had not grieved deeply for the loss of these young people that I had ministered to and who were my friends. But I could only describe it as like a wall, just this huge wall of darkness just seemed to fall on me. And whereas I would have a day every now and then where I was depressed, this just seemed to stay there. The result of that is that I hardly left the house for over 3 weeks, except to go to church. The parsonage at that church was at the bottom of a driveway, led up a steep hill to the church. And on Sunday mornings, literally, I felt like I was climbing a mountain to get up there to the church. Now, the strange thing about being a pastor with this struggle is that although pastoring brings many pressures that oftentimes lead to depression, the truth is that God used ministry and being a pastor to also save me. Because in those times, about the only time, in that worst of times, the only time I kind of felt normal was when I was in worship. I would climb that mountain and make it up there to the church. I would go in, and people would smile at me, and I felt compelled to smile back, even though I didn't feel like it. Sometimes you got to fake it till you make it, right? And they would hug me, and we would shake hands, and there would be this fellowship, and I'd start to feel a little better, and Then the band would start and we would worship, and God would lift my spirit. He would lift my spirit up. And then the most amazing thing is that somehow during this time when I felt so empty, God, through his Spirit, would feed the flock that he had entrusted to my care. Somehow, he would give me words to say, and I would preach a message that would bless people and help them. And when we were all done, I would say, I would feel much better. But then another thing would happen. As we closed the doors and turned out the lights, I would walk back down that hill. And as I did, it was as if I was walking back into a deep, deep hole. I would come into the parsonage, and oftentimes I would walk right past the dinner table, because another one of the things that I felt at that time was food had lost all its flavor, and I'd lost my appetite. I would go straight to bed, and I would cover up and just lay there. There's a commercial on TV that says, where does depression hurt? And the answer they give is everywhere. And this was true during that time. I would have body aches, like a much older man. I was only 38 at the time. I had this sensation of heat in my forehead that wouldn't go away. It caused me to grimace and squint all the time. I would grind my teeth when I tried to sleep. There were times when I wanted to sleep, but I was wide awake, and times when I was wide awake when I should have been sleeping. Candy was so concerned for me at that time that she would call me from her work several times a day just to see how I was doing. And I would say, a lot of times I would not answer the phone because I didn't even want to tell her, I didn't want to answer that question, because I couldn't answer it in a good way. Part of my responsibility was to pick up Bethany from her school. And I would go and pick her up, and she would get in the car, and I literally remember trying to look away from her so that she couldn't see me. I thought somehow she could see through me and know what her daddy was feeling. There were times when she would say to me, Daddy, what's wrong? And I would have to turn away and hide my face so she couldn't see that I was crying. These were very, very dark days, and they lasted for almost a month. I've had people ask me when I tell them about that time, which I really think I was clinically depressed at that time, but I refused to seek any help. I've had people ask me sometimes, did you ever think about suicide? And my answer to that question is no. The reason was because as a pastor, I had been on the other side of that terrible, violent act. I had to go to a family in our church and tell them that we had received word that their son had taken his own life. And I saw the hurt and the damage that did in their lives firsthand. And so I knew that as long as I had any self-control at all, I could never do that. But if the question is, did you ever feel like dying? My answer to that question is definitely yes. It would have been such a relief during that time to have simply go to sleep and not wake up. I was there in a very, very dark place. Like worship, there were some other things that as a pastor that I simply just had to do. One of those things was I had to go visit people in the hospital. Now, let me tell you when you know that you're really depressed. When you go into a hospital room and you see a sick person there in their hospital bed and you envy them, you think, wouldn't this just be good to just be here in a bed and quiet and, like that? Now, I never got up the nerve to say to a person in the hospital, would you just scoot over and let me get in there with you? But the truth is when you think like that, when that goes through your mind, you know that you're not well. You're really sick. And I was really sick. Now, how did I get out of that time? How did I get out of the worst of that time? Well, I didn't have any answers for that. I just know that it happened gradually. one day at a time. I think a lot of it, again, was that I was a pastor and there were people that needed me. And there were things that I had to do. And I had enough responsibility about me that no matter how bad I felt, I would go do those things that I had to do. And then I would feel some better, you know. But little by little, I got out of there. But I had another big fear, and that was that once you've been to a place like that, there's always this fear that, what if I go back there? What if that happens to me again? A few months later, by God's grace, I found an article in a ministry journal about a pastor who had had a breakdown, who struggled with depression. And in that article, he recommended to pastors who might also struggle that they do three things. The first is see your doctor because and get a physical, because lots of times physical illnesses and depression go together, and you needed to find out if you were sick. The second one was to don't be afraid to try medication. Antidepressants, I learned, were not narcotics, but were instead a medicine that would help your brain produce certain chemicals that it lacked that produced depressive moods. And I found that relieving. And then third, get some good Christian counseling. Now, I got up the nerve to do 2 out of those 3. I went to see my doctor. He was a good friend, a member of our congregation, and he was so compassionate as I shared with him my depression and what I had gone through and how I struggled. He just was wonderful and gracious to me. And he suggested that I take some medication. And I did. And there were samples, and he said, see if these worked. And you know what? They did. They worked. They leveled out my moods. My emotions had been like a roller coaster that I had ridden my whole life. And all of a sudden, it was like they leveled out, you know? So it helped so much. But here's the thing. I had another fear on top of my other fears, and that was that someone would find out that their pastor took antidepressants. Oh, man, that would kill me for sure if somebody did that, you know? So I had this secret that I had to keep just holding down and burying so deep. The medication allowed me to feel more normal and to think about things clearly and honestly improve my prayer life. And out of that renewal, I sensed that God was leading our family to a new beginning. It would be terribly difficult to leave family and friends in Virginia, but we felt God was leading us when a church in Casey, Illinois, invited us to come and be their pastor in the fall of 2002. The new place was encouraging, and we quickly found ourselves happily serving there. With the medication, I was managing my moods much better, but the fact that I was carrying this secret that I thought could destroy me still made me insecure, especially around new people that I was meeting. Again, I was just sure that the revelation that I struggled with depression and was on medication would destroy me and cause others to lose confidence in me as their pastor. After serving there a couple of years in Casey, I didn't realize it, but all of that was about to change. In fact, I was about to change. It all started with a man named Norm Truelove. Now, that's a great name for a brother in Christ, isn't it? I told him that one time, and he said, try going to jail with that name. You see, the first time I met Norm, he was behind glass and wearing stripes. His mother was in our congregation, and he had recently been arrested and on drug charges, and she had asked me to go see him. And we began a relationship. When he went on to a state penitentiary, he would write me. In one of those letters, he said he had gone through a 12-step program while he was in prison. And having gone through that, he got to step 12, which said, now that you have been found some sobriety, you need to help others who have been through the same thing. And he wrote and said, Mark, I would like to do that, and I'd like to do it through the church. Well, quite honestly, I looked at that, and I said, well, we'll see. And I put it on my desk. I did see. When Norm got out of jail, he had really changed. Everybody who knew him could testify to it. And he had a plan to put his life back together, and he did it. He restored his relationship with his kids and got a job, and every time the doors were open, we couldn't have church enough for Norm. He was always there. He and I would work out together, believe it or not, and we became very, very deep friends. But he wouldn't let me forget the letter that he wrote me. One day he came in the office and he said, I told you I wanted to help people who had problems like me. Are you going to help me do that, or do I need to go somewhere else? I said, hold it. We'll figure out how to do this. So after some research, I came across the program that we now know as Celebrate Recovery. It's a Christ-centered recovery program that deals with not only chemical addictions, but hurts, habits, and hang-ups. And after an introduction to the program, we got a group together to go to Saddleback Church in California to learn firsthand how to lead this program. We took 8 leaders. It included myself, Norm, 2 of my staff, and 4 others who had various areas of recovery. Now, I went out there with this idea that I'm a pastor, and I'm going to help those people who have problems, people that have problems with drugs and alcohol and addictions, And when you hear recovery ministries, that's probably what you think of too. But what I didn't know is that Celebrate Recovery is a broad-based program that helps people with all kinds of hurts and all kinds of habits and all kinds of hang-ups, okay? And God had a surprise for me out there in California. I was sitting in a small group listening to people introduce themselves as they went around, gave their name, their relationship with Christ, and then their hurt, habit, or hang-up. And I thought, what am I going to say? And God providentially put someone 1 seat away from me, and he spoke up and he said, my name is David, and I'm a pastor. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I struggle with depression and anxiety. And my mouth just dropped open. I was like, oh, so they do that here. And my thought was, well, here's where I was. I had a decision to make. I could keep my secret, or I could open up to these people and tell them about my struggle. Now, all of them were strangers except for Norm, and that made it a little easier. But when it came my turn, I opened up my mouth and I said these words. Hi, my name is Mark. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm a pastor, and I struggle with depression. And I added, until this moment, I've never told anyone that except my wife and my doctor. In that moment, I felt a lot of emotions, but 2 things for sure. One was, there was a sense of relief in being able to just say those words out loud. I was broken, and I was admitting it to a group of people that I struggled with depression. The second thing was this sense that, Mark, this is not going to be the last time that you say those words. And it wasn't. In those days in California, it really changed all of us who went there. And we came back to Casey, Illinois at that time to start this new ministry of Celebrate Recovery. And we were determined to do that. So when I came back, I went out there to be a pastor of a church that did recovery ministries. I came back as a pastor in recovery. And I did it. I went through the step studies myself. I led the men's study, in fact. And I began applying these steps in a personal way to my life. I saw firsthand the value of doing so. But I also saw what happens when we, in the church, when we open up to other people and really let them know what's going on inside of us. The fellowship gets deeper and the relationships get stronger, and we begin to grow together in our relationship with Christ and with one another. Step 1 in the program says, we admitted we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors and that our lives had become unmanageable. That first step was the hardest for me because, after all, it had taken over 30 years to get to that first step for me. And on January 1st, 2006, I stood in front of a congregation at Casey with 250 people in attendance that day, and I said these words, "Hi, my name is Mark. I am a follower of Jesus Christ, and I'm your pastor." And they all looked at me like, "Yeah? What, you know?" And I said, "You know that, but what you don't know is this. I struggle with depression." And I told my story. Now, there it was. I had taken the secret that I had kept hidden for all those years, and now I had shared it with the church. What was going to happen? I remember taking the longest walk ever from the front of the platform to the front door where I usually stood and shook hands as people left, and wondering if I still had a job and if I still had any friends. Can I tell you that the answer was positive on both accounts? People stood in line that day to hug me, often with tears, not tears of pity, but tears of real concern and compassion. And I can't tell you how many leaned close to me in my ear and said, "Pastor, I struggle too. And it's so good to know that I have a pastor who understands." You see, instead of destroying my ability to minister to others, I found instead that God used my brokenness to open up a whole new world of opportunities to minister to others through Celebrate Recovery and in my regular pastoral ministries. These opportunities would grow in years to come. As you know, 2 years ago, your former pastor invited me to come and join the staff here at Salem and to help start the ministry of Celebrate Recovery here. And every Thursday night out at the Hope House, we fill that place with songs of joy and words of deliverance and freedom. It's a wonderful place to be, and I love that ministry there. And many of my friends are here this morning who are part of that. And if you struggle with hurts or habits or hang-ups, that's the place for you. Any Thursday night, you can come out and see what that's about. I can't imagine any church with the problems and the hurt and the pain that's out there. I can't imagine any church not having access to a ministry like that. And I'm so thankful that Grace Church of the Nazarene cares enough to invest their time, their money, their resources, their volunteers to make a place like the Hope House available to people in our community. You're to be commended for that. Personally, I have found much freedom for myself in Celebrate Recovery. I came to understand the hidden anger which proved to be the source of much of my depression. I come to the place where I am accepting and loving myself. What I mean by that is I'm beginning to really believe what God says about me and to see myself as He sees me and erase negative thoughts from my mind. I've learned preventative measures to keep me from going down roads of thought that lead to depression. It used to be that I would go down those roads of thought knowing that there's a cliff at the end of that road and trusting that somehow I could hit the brakes before I would go over the edge, right? Well, what recovery did for me is I put big road signs up in front of those roads that say, "Don't go down this road." And so I just don't. and it helps me to think better. I've been able to reduce my medication significantly. And most importantly, I've been able to be part of a family and Celebrate Recovery, a group of friends that I can call on anytime and encourage to pray for me. Where once I felt isolated and alone, I am no more. And I really love my recovery family and my church family. I'm not alone. Through all of this, I learned the same lesson that the Apostle Paul learned centuries before when he admitted his own brokenness right in the scriptures themselves. You know, Paul healed people in Jesus' name many times, but he had some issue in his life that wouldn't go away. In fact, it says he prayed about it 3 times, that God would take it away. And God said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. And he learned this lesson. He says, therefore I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I can't even begin to express how real this passage is to me today. Because what God has done in my life is he has taken my greatest weakness and used it as an avenue for his strength. He has taken the very thing that I have been most ashamed to speak of, and he has used it as a means by which I can proclaim his good news. Now, I believe he can do the same for you, and I believe he wants to. See, I've shared with you my secret of how Jesus brought me out of the darkness into his light, how he opened my eyes to the reality that what looked like my weakness can by his power be used as his strength, how the enemy can blind us to the truth and bind us up in the lie that no one will understand us if we confess who we really are. One of the things we're learning together as a church, not only through Celebrate Recovery, but as a church, especially as our church grows, is the importance that we have a small group of people, a small group of people that we can be real with, that we can open up to, that we can tell about our lives and our struggles and share them and bear one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. One of the things we are hoping to do come the first of the year is begin to have small groups, many of you that are already signing up to say, I want to be a leader, and we're going to have a leadership training for that, is to let small groups meet in homes where people can really get to know each other. Because if it's about getting to know 500 people here on a Sunday morning, it's just not going to happen, right? So we're learning about that. We're learning about that. Jesus opens the eyes of the blind. And I've shared it here before that in my study that though Jesus healed the blind many times, he never did it the same way. For some, Jesus only has to speak a word or touch them and their eyes are open and they can see. Others, it gets more messy. Jesus has to spit in the mud and spit in the dirt and make some mud and put it on their eyes. And then he sends them, he puts them together with a group of people who walk on a journey that ultimately will end in their healing. But it's a path and it takes time. But I do know this, that whatever you're struggling with this morning, Jesus wants to heal you. And whether he does it like this morning, or whether he begins this morning a process of healing that you take with others, he wants to heal you. So whatever you're struggling with this morning during these closing moments, if you want to come forward, you can pray here. You can pray in your seat, but if you'll just open your life up to him and say, Jesus, you, maybe only you, know my heart. You know what I'm going through, what I'm struggling with. You know that thing that I desperately need freedom from. He will hear you, and he will begin healing in you even this very day. As the Lord calls and you call upon him, would you find that healing beginning even this morning? In Jesus' name.